Hey friends, tonight we're stepping into the sun-scorched, olive oil-slicked world of ancient Greece, a land famed for philosophy, democracy, and statues that had a firm no-pants policy. But behind the legends of Plato, Spartan warriors, and glittering temples lies a much grittier reality. Because while ancient Greece laid the groundwork for Western civilization, it also handed its average citizen a daily grind that most of us wouldn't last a morning in. Before we dive into the sweat and stone, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always a trip seeing this little community stretch across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that calming hum, and settle in for tonight's journey. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your day doesn't start with an alarm clock, but with the sun turning your home into a clay-baked oven. Your house is simple: sun-dried mud brick or rough stone, tiny windows with no glass, just wooden shutters to block the goats, and, if you're lucky, let in a breeze. No insulation, no fan, and definitely no such thing as your space, unless you count the one spot the family goat doesn't nap in. You wake early, not from discipline, but because lying down any longer feels like slow roasting yourself. In summer, the walls hoard heat like treasure, and by sunrise, they're radiating it straight into your bones. Come winter, those same walls flip to freezer mode, and you're just a thin blanket away from being a frostbitten statue. You probably slept on a straw-stuffed mattress or a mat, with no pillow, just a rolled-up cloak or your own arm. If you were lucky, the lice took the night off. They usually didn't. There's no running water. Your morning routine means trekking to a public fountain, or, if you live in the sticks, hauling it from a well. You balance clay jars on your shoulders, whispering ancient curses at the idea of dropping them and undoing your spine for nothing. Bathing, not part of the morning. That's an end-of-day luxury, if you get to it at all. For now, maybe splash your face, rub on some olive oil, and scrape it off with a metal strigil. It's like a spa day. Minus the spa, the day, or anything remotely refreshing. Also, forget privacy. Your entire family shares the same space. You eat, sleep, argue, and point fingers over who tracked goat poop in from the street, which, by the way, is the street, your hallway, and your neighborhood newsfeed. You haven't even eaten yet, and already your back aches, you're sweating, and your tunic's clinging to places no fabric should. And the kicker? This is the best part of your day. So you made it through the stone sauna that is your bedroom. Time to refuel, right? Welcome to breakfast, ancient Greek style. A meal so bare bones it makes intermittent fasting look decadent. Your first bite of the day? Barley bread, dense, dry, and only slightly tastier than the dirt it was baked near. Known as maza, it's ground barley mixed with water, formed into flat cakes, and baked on hot stones or in fire ashes. Basically, an ancient granola bar with none of the crunch, sweetness, or joy. You might soften it by dunking it in watered-down wine, because yes, the water alone might make you sick. No filter, no boiling pot, no fancy pitcher in your clay pantry. So what's in your cup? Just water cut with a splash of wine, shared by kids and elders alike. Not to feel merry, but to stay alive. If you're fortunate, maybe there's a fig on the table, a few olives, or a smear of goat cheese. But let's be real. You're not fortunate. You're lucky if your bread isn't buzzing with yesterday's flies, or hard enough to crack a molar. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit bowl, no honey. Unless you live near a beekeeper and know what it costs to make them look the other way. And forget about sitting down. Meals are fast, eaten on your feet, no chairs, no forks, and definitely no time for mindful chewing. You eat, you nod, you move on. And if you're a woman, you don't even eat with the men. In many homes, women and children wait until the men are finished, so you get to be hungry and disappointed. It's ironic, really. These are the same Greeks who gave the world symposiums, feasts, and lyrical odes to wine. But breakfast? Not even worth a passing poem. It's dry, scorched, and brutally functional. Still, you choke it down, because it's the only thing between you and a full day under the blazing sun, hauling things and debating with loud philosophers. Bon appetit. And good luck keeping your teeth intact. Now that your belly's full of stale barley and sour wine, it's time to freshen up, or try to. Because hygiene, in ancient Greece, wasn't about smelling good. It was about ritual, olive oil, and resignation. Soap? That's a dream from the future. Most mornings, you splash yourself with cold water from the public fountain, if you're lucky enough to live near one. No shampoo, no body wash, no sponge unless you've managed to swipe one from a diver in the Aegean. Instead, you grab some olive oil and rub it into your skin, not to moisturize, but to trap the grime. Then you scrape it off with a bronze strigil, a curved blade that leaves you slightly less greasy, but still questionable. Imagine basting yourself in salad dressing, then shaving it off with a butter knife. That's your skincare routine. And you're doing this in public, naked, with a crowd. Because in ancient Greece, hygiene is communal. Privacy? Not a thing. Teeth? No toothbrush. No minty paste. If you're fancy, you might swish vinegar or dab crushed charcoal on your gums, but most just gnaw a twig and hope for divine intervention. Deodorant doesn't exist. Perfume does though, if you can afford it. A dab of rose oil or myrrh might buy you an hour of grace before the heat and your sandals undo it. The result? A cocktail of musk, dust, and desperation. Laundry? If you're poor, your tunic hasn't seen water since the last festival. Washing clothes means beating them on river rocks, and who has time for that? So yes, the Greeks gave us democracy, architecture, and philosophy. But basic cleanliness? Not so much. You scrape off yesterday's dirt and hope to offend slightly fewer people today. Now that you've scraped, splashed, and oiled your way into the morning, it's time to get dressed. Your wardrobe? Minimal and barely functional. You've got two choices, a chiton or a hymation, basically large sheets of linen. You wrap, pin, belt, and pray the wind is kind, because one strong gust and your entire philosophy is on full display. Underwear doesn't exist. Bras, also a number. Unless you're a Spartan woman trained to wrestle, you're just hoping your outfit holds. Footwear? If you're lucky, it's leather sandals. If not, it's barefoot on sun-scorched stones. If you don't have sandals, congratulations, you're barefoot. That means spending your day walking on sun-scorched stone, goat-trampled dirt, and whatever unidentifiable sludge the market spilled into the street. Imagine tiptoeing across a frying pan in July while dodging donkey droppings. That's your commute. And no, there's no such thing as sun protection. Hats are for farmers, sailors, or people who care less about fashion and more about not cooking their skulls. Sunscreen? Doesn't exist. Science hasn't arrived yet. The Aegean sun doesn't care how wise you are. It'll sear through your rhetoric and burn your shoulders until you're one long linen-wrapped blister. By midday, your tunic has welded itself to your body in 4 places that defy geometry. Your feet are black with dust, your back is sticky with sweat, and your patience, like your tunic pin, is holding on by a thread. And don't get too modest. Public nudity doesn't raise eyebrows here. You might pass naked athletes wrestling in the gymnasium, or politicians delivering rousing speeches in togas that barely qualify as clothing. If you're rich, maybe your tunic has a hint of purple or saffron yellow. But for most, it's drab off-white or dirt-dyed brown. Dyes cost money, and no one's wasting royal hues on a guy who repairs fishing nets for a living. So you shuffle through the dust like a sunburned burrito, clutching your robe and praying the wind stays merciful. And the cruelest part? You're only halfway through the day. Because in ancient Greece, military service isn't a career. It's your civic duty, your social role, and sometimes your ticket to an early grave. If you're a free male citizen, especially in Athens or Sparta, congratulations. You're automatically in the army whether you asked for it or not. By your teens, you're already practicing with wooden swords and learning to march in a phalanx, an elegant term for stand in a line and hope your neighbor doesn't trip. In Sparta, it's even worse. Boys enter military training at age 7 under the brutal agog system, which molds warriors through beatings, starvation, and isolation. The survivors become soldiers. The rest become cautionary tales. Athens is a bit softer, but not by much. 2 years of mandatory training in your late teens, followed by decades of being on call for whatever war breaks out next. And there's always a war. Sparta against Athens, Athens against Persia, Sparta against basically everyone. Even if peace does arrive, it's just an awkward pause before the next conflict kicks off over trade routes, sheep theft, or bruised egos. And you don't get to say, I'm more of a poet. Even philosophers like Socrates fought, with actual weapons, not clever retorts. If you're lucky and wealthy, you'll gear up with a bronze helmet, chest plate, greaves, round hopland shield, and a spear. If you're not, you're in cloth and leather, hoping the arrows have bad aim. Because here's the catch, you supply your own armor. Being a soldier is a BYOB affair. Bring your own bronze. Poorer citizens beg, borrow, or fight lightly armed, which is Greek for more likely to die early. And when you're not at war, you're still working, drilling, polishing weapons, arguing politics in the assembly, or rowing a warship until your hands bleed. Those triremes don't row themselves, and your day off is probably a myth. No veterans' benefits, no pension, no therapy, just old wounds, bad knees, and a gravestone carved with 3 lines about bravery and the wrong date of birth. Think that sounds tough? Wait until you hear what life's like if you're a woman. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, women had fewer rights than a decorative urn. You couldn't vote, couldn't own land, couldn't hold office, and rarely left the house without a male escort. If you were seen in public too often, people didn't assume you were popular. They assumed you were a courtesan, or worse, a Spartan. Your day starts before the sun's up. You spin wool, weave cloth, grind grain, fetch water, bake bread, manage the slaves, if your household can afford them, and raise the children. You're the de facto CEO of the household, just without pay, weekends, or respect. Your social calendar? Empty. No trips to the theatre. No philosophical debates under olive trees. No gymnasium sessions. That's a naked men-only zone. You're confined to the gymnasium, the women's quarters. Your window to the outside world is quite literally a window, usually with lattice work to obscure your view. Education? Maybe. If your family's generous, you might learn a few letters. But forget philosophy, politics, or geometry. Those are boys' subjects. Your curriculum. Obedience, silence, and perfect Peter. Marriage. That arrives early. You're likely paired off in your early teens to a man old enough to be your father. The arrangement is made by your actual father, who treats the whole thing like a livestock trade. Dowries are essential. Love is not. And once you have children, congratulations. You're now defined by your uterus. Now, Sparta was the outlier. Spartan women had more freedom. They exercised in public, received formal education, and could even own property. Sounds progressive, until you realize that their liberation came courtesy of a government obsessed with breeding warriors. Your main job? Give birth to strong sons. If your children were weak, or none came at all, shame followed. And if your husband dies, your options don't expand, they shrink. You can't inherit much. You can't remarry without permission. You're stuck, legally, financially, socially, frozen in place, wrapped in linen, and told to stay quiet while the men handle everything. Yes, the Greeks worshipped goddesses, Athena, Artemis, Hera. But real women? They were expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible. Now, about that birthplace of democracy claim, technically true, but practically, not for you. To vote in Athens' famous ecclesia, you had to be male, over 18, and born to 2 Athenian parents. That ruled out women, foreigners, called metics, children, and slaves, which combined made up nearly 90% of the population. So no, it wasn't government by the people. It was government by a very specific subset of sunburned men in sandals. And if you were one of the lucky few who qualified, you weren't just allowed to vote, you were expected to. All eligible citizens debated laws, served on juries, and could be chosen by lottery to run things like the treasury, foreign policy, or infrastructure. Sounds democratic, until you remember there were 0 qualifications. One day, your neighbor, who sells pickled fish, might be managing naval strategy. The next, your uncle, who swears he saw a centaur, might be deciding a murder case. And if anyone got too popular or too loud, ostracism. Once a year, citizens could write down the name of someone they disliked on a shard of pottery, an ostracon, and with enough votes, that person was exiled for 10 years. No trial, no explanation. Just, too much attention, go away. So yes, democracy was born in Athens, but like many things from antiquity, it came with an asterisk. And yet, for all its flaws, Athenian democracy was revolutionary. It gave a voice to the common man, well, some common men, and laid the foundation for political systems yet to come. But let's be clear, it wasn't fair, and it wasn't inclusive. If you were a woman, silenced. A metic, an immigrant who paid taxes but wasn't born in Athens, silenced. A slave carving columns for the Parthenon, absolutely silenced. A philosopher who asked one too many inconvenient questions, possibly executed. Yes, democracy was born in ancient Greece. But if you showed up expecting equality, civil rights, or a seat at the table, you'd be escorted out of the assembly and told to bring your own ostracon. And speaking of silence, let's talk about slavery. In ancient Greece, slavery wasn't controversial. It was expected. Even modest homes had at least one slave, not because they were rich, but because slavery was so embedded in daily life that the idea of not owning another person was as alien as rejecting sandals or sunlight. Slaves weren't defined by race. They came from wherever Greek ambition reached: Thrace, Scythia, Asia Minor, even rival Greek city-states. Some were prisoners of war, some were born into bondage, some were kidnapped and sold into it. And business? Always booming. In Athens, your slave might cook your meals, fetch your water, clean your home, carry your shopping, and stand quietly while you wax poetic about justice at dinner. In many households, they also ran the finances or raised the children. And in the silver mines of Lorient, slaves, including children, crawled through pitch-black tunnels, inhaling poisonous dust and dying for the sake of coinage and civic pride. And speaking of silence, let's talk about slavery. In ancient Greece, slavery wasn't controversial. It was expected. Even modest homes had at least one slave, not because they were rich, but because slavery was so embedded in daily life that the idea of not owning another person was as alien as rejecting sandals or sunlight. Slaves weren't defined by race. They came from wherever Greek ambition reached: Thrace, Scythia, Asia Minor, even rival Greek city-states. Some were prisoners of war, some were born into bondage, some were kidnapped and sold into it. And business? Always booming. In Athens, your slave might cook your meals, fetch your water, clean your home, carry your shopping, and stand quietly while you wax poetic about justice at dinner. In many households, they also ran the finances or raised the children. And in the silver mines of Lorient, slaves, including children, crawled through pitch-black tunnels, inhaling poisonous dust, and dying for the sake of coinage and civic pride. Some slaves were educated. They taught reading and math, worked as clerks, and managed bank accounts. But don't mistake skill for status. They were still property. They could be beaten, sold, branded, or killed without legal consequence. And if a few earned their freedom, they became freedmen, still barred from citizenship, land ownership, or political participation. Freedom, in this context, meant slightly less oppression. And abolition? Not even a thought. There was no anti-slavery movement, no underground resistance. Even philosophers, yes, that Aristotle, argued that slavery was natural and necessary. According to him, some people were slaves by nature. Enlightening, right? So yes, the Greeks gave us democracy, ethics, and philosophy. But they built all of it on the backs of people who had no names in the history books and no voice in the assembly. That's not a tragic detail. That's the foundation. Now, feeling unwell in ancient Greece? That's unfortunate, because unless Hippocrates is your neighbor, your healthcare plan consists of local herbs, temple prayers, and blind optimism. There are no hospitals, at least nothing you'd recognize as one. If you're sick, you stay home. Maybe your aunt knows a decent poultice. Maybe your local priest can chant over your bed while waving burning incense. Maybe your city has a temple to Asclepius, god of healing, and you can sleep on the floor there and hope a sacred snake slithers by. That's about the extent of the care. Greek medicine, even in its most advanced form, was part science, part philosophy, and part educated guess. Doctors believed in the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness? That's just an imbalance in your bodily fluids. Too hot, too cold, too moist, too dry? There's a humour for that. Fever? Clearly too much blood. Better drain some. Melancholy? Must be excess black bile. Take a walk and avoid figs. Broken leg? Hope you don't need it for walking again. So yes, ancient Greek doctors were pioneers, but they were also very comfortable prescribing leeches, vomiting, or a change in your personality as legitimate cures. And if those didn't work, well, maybe the gods were angry. Coughing, too much phlegm, melancholy, that's black bile. Try fasting. Or maybe just stare out to sea and sigh dramatically. Most treatments in ancient Greece were based on a combination of trial, error, and garlic. You might be given crushed poppy seeds, good luck staying conscious, or boiled figs, or a compress made of vinegar and something a guy scraped off a goat. Did it work? Occasionally. Did it hurt? Always. Surgery was rare, terrifying, and an absolute last resort. With no anesthesia, no antiseptics, and no germ theory, even a basic wound could go septic and end you. The tools? Iron knives, bone saws, and prayers. Lots of prayers. If something needed amputating, better hope you brought a leather strap to bite down on, and maybe a god to pray to. Childbirth? A midwife handled it, but even on a good day it was dangerous. Infant and maternal mortality rates were high. One breech baby, one obstructed labour, and that could be the end for both of you. If you were wealthy, you might summon a travelling physician, someone with a scroll, a beard and oils that smelled faintly of desperation. If you were poor, you had local remedies, folk wisdom, and sheer hope. And if none of that worked, you didn't recover. That said, they did believe in some solid basics. Rest, clean air, a balanced diet. So there's that. Ancient Greek medicine gave us the Hippocratic Oath. It also gave us advice like drink boiled cabbage water. So yes, healthcare in ancient Greece. Mostly herbs, hope, and hang on. Now theatre in ancient Greece. That was something else entirely. It wasn't just entertainment. It was civic duty, religious observance, and emotional boot camp. Let's start with the good news. It was free, but only if you were a male citizen. Women, slaves, and foreigners. Sorry, theatres for the Democracy Club only. Picture this, a massive open-air theatre carved into a hillside, like the Great Theatre of Dionysus in Athens. Thousands of citizens packed shoulder to sweaty shoulder, ready for a full day, yes, day of performance. The Dionysia festival ran from sunrise to sunset, with back-to-back tragedies, comedies and satyr plays. No intermission, no concessions, and if you had to pee, there was always the hillside. Show up late, talk during the performance, you could be fined. Theatre wasn't passive, it was participatory, and occasionally violent. The plays themselves, intense. Tragedies were emotional endurance tests. Murder, madness, hubris, God-smashing families over ancient curses. You didn't go to laugh. You went to grieve, together, publicly. Then came the comedies, sharp, rude, political, and wildly inappropriate. They roasted politicians, mocked philosophers, ridiculed entire cities, and loved a good poop joke. Picture a cross between Saturday Night Live and a frat party with a PhD in classics, featuring actors in giant phallic costumes. No, really. All the actors were men, even in female roles, wearing towering masks, platform shoes, and exaggerated costumes. The chorus danced, sang, and shouted commentary like a proto-Greek version of Twitter, only louder, and dressed in matching tunics. And the audience? They didn't sit quietly. They yelled. They booed. They threw things. If they loved it, they wept and cheered. If they hated it, you knew. Theatre was democracy with drama. At the end of the festival, a jury voted on which playwright won. So after crying for 3 days over Orestes, you might find out that some obscene comedy about a talking pig god took home the prize. That was theatre in ancient Greece. Sacred, chaotic, hilarious, devastating. You weren't just a spectator, you were a participant, and possibly throwing olives. So, you've survived your tragic, all-day theatre binge. Congratulations. You're dehydrated, emotionally gutted, and probably crying over someone named Orestes. Time to stretch your legs and head to the Agora, the buzzing heart of the city. Markets, gossip, politics, pickpockets, stray goats. And oh look, there's a barefoot man in a cloak asking strangers, "What is justice?" Welcome to philosophy. It's everywhere. And no, it's not optional. In ancient Athens, philosophy wasn't just a pastime. It was the local blood sport. The heavyweights? Names you know now as intellectual titans. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Back then, just eccentric guys who loitered in public, started arguments, and made people question everything, including whether they should have left the house that day. Take Socrates. He didn't write anything down, didn't charge money, and didn't offer answers. Instead, he made a full-time career out of dismantling people's opinions with relentless questions. You'd be buying olives, petting a goat, living your life, and then, do you believe in truth? Sure. What is truth? Cue an existential spiral, mild public humiliation, and a sudden desire to move to Sparta. Socrates was so annoying, so unrelentingly inquisitive, that Athens eventually executed him. Officially, it was for corrupting the youth and impiety. Unofficially, he probably ruined one too many dinner parties. His student, Plato, wrote it all down. Founded the academy. Then came Aristotle, who tutored a teenage Alexander the Great, because nothing says philosophical education like training a future world conqueror. Philosophy in Athens wasn't some cozy academic chat. It was loud, spontaneous, public, and emotionally dangerous. No microphones, no safe spaces, just open debate, sharp wit, and enough ego to eclipse the Acropolis. And if you thought you could just walk by, think again. Philosophers loved roping in innocent bystanders. Say one vague thing near Plato's academy, and boom, you're today's case study in flawed reasoning. Yes, ancient philosophy gave us logic, ethics, science, political theory. It also gave us migraines, identity crises, and a 70% chance of being publicly eviscerated by a guy in sandals. So you've made it. You're articulate, clever, politically active. People like you. Maybe too much. Congratulations, that's your first mistake. Because in Athens, being too popular wasn't a compliment. It was a red flag. Enter ostracism, not a metaphor. A real, legally sanctioned act of democratic ghosting. Once a year, Athenians would gather and vote on whether to hold an ostracism. If the answer was yes, thousands of citizens would write a name, your name, on a broken piece of pottery called an ostracon. Get 6,000 or more, and boom, 10 years of exile. No trial, no defense, just pack your chitons and get out. You didn't have to be corrupt, or dangerous, or even unpopular. You just had to be too influential, too persuasive, too admired. Maybe you were a war hero, or gave one too many rousing speeches. Or maybe, truly tragically, you had phenomenal hair, and then democracy said, yeah, no, too much, bye. You were voted off the island, but with sandals instead of a torch. Here's the kicker. It wasn't permanent. You were exiled for 10 years, but your stuff stayed safe. Your citizenship remained. When you came back, it was like, hey, welcome back. No hard feelings about the whole mass exile thing. Even famous, respected Athenians weren't safe. Aristides the Just was so beloved that one man voted against him purely because he was tired of hearing how righteous he was. Brutal? Yes. Democratic? Technically. Passive-aggressive? Absolutely. Even Themistocles, the military genius who saved Athens at the Battle of Salamis, got the boot once he got too cocky. Turns out, gratitude has an expiration date. Ostracism was meant to protect Athens from tyrants, but it often punished success. So if you were ambitious, you had to walk a fine line. Be respected, but not too respected. Popular, but not charismatic enough to worry people. Think of it like a reality show where the prize for winning too many fans is being exiled to the countryside with your dignity and olive oil stash. Athens gave birth to democracy, but it also invented cancel culture 2,500 years ahead of schedule. In ancient Greece, you didn't ask if you were going to die young. You just wondered how soon and how painfully. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years, and that was if you made it past infancy, which was no small feat. Roughly 1 in 3 children didn't survive childhood, thanks to disease, poor nutrition, and the fact that hygiene was, as we've discussed, more theoretical than actual. You could die from anything. A scratch that turned septic, a fever no one could explain, childbirth, a leading cause of death for women, or something as simple as drinking the wrong cup of water. Medicine was limited, and divine intervention wasn't known for consistency. If you lived in a city, disease spread fast. Cramped quarters, open-air sewers, and communal fountains made epidemics a regular part of life. The infamous plague of Athens during the Peloponnesian War wiped out 1/3 of the city. Thucydides wrote about it. Then he got it. Then somehow survived. Most weren't so lucky. War, constant. If you were a man, odds were you'd die holding a spear or rowing a trireme. Even if you weren't killed in battle, injuries often turned fatal days later. No antibiotics, no stitches, just hope and garlic compresses. And there was always the possibility of death by divine tantrum. Displease a god, forget a sacrifice, mock a temple statue, or speak ill of Zeus after 3 cups of wine, and you could find yourself on the wrong end of a lightning bolt, plague, or spontaneous goat stampede. Burial rites were important. If your family couldn't afford a proper funeral, with coins for the ferrymen, and rituals to secure your spot in the afterlife, you might be dumped outside the city walls, unmarked and forgotten. Not only was that tragic, it was spiritually dangerous. The Greeks believed unburied souls wandered eternally, caught between worlds. Death wasn't poetic, it was daily. And it didn't care about your philosophy, your beauty, or your lineage. You could be a slave, a general, or a poet, and still die from a mouldy fig or an angry mosquito. The Greeks had 12 Olympians, and not a single one of them liked you. In theory, ancient Greek religion was all about harmony with the divine, worshipping Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Poseidon, and the rest of the golden crew up on Mount Olympus. In practice, it was constant spiritual damage control. These gods weren't peaceful, all-loving deities. They were divine drama queens with superpowers. Forget a sacrifice, they'd ruin your crops, say the wrong prayer, your ship sinks, step into the wrong grove, snake bite, plague, famine, take your pick. The gods didn't just demand your loyalty, they demanded perfect timing, flawless rituals, and unblinking obedience. You didn't have weekly temple visits. You had daily rituals, home altars, seasonal festivals, and civic ceremonies. You'd better pour out some wine to Poseidon, and maybe throw in a goat just to be safe. Each god had favorites and grudges. Apollo might protect your city unless your grandfather offended him once, in which case you're cursed until further notice. Hera was the goddess of marriage, but she also specialized in making mortal women's lives miserable if Zeus so much as looked at them. Athena rewarded wisdom and also turned people into spiders, casual, and if the Olympians weren't enough to keep you nervous, there were nymphs, satyrs, spirits, river gods, and monsters lurking around every corner. Step on the wrong patch of sacred land, and suddenly your left leg belongs to a vengeful woodland sprite. But worst of all, you never knew why something bad happened. Was it the wrong offering? The wrong timing? Did you insult a god in a dream? Maybe it was your cousin. Maybe it was something your great-grandfather did. Doesn't matter. The gods work in mysterious and deeply personal ways. And yet, for all the terror, Greek religion was woven into every part of life, from politics to childbirth to the Olympic Games. You feared the gods, yes, but you also depended on them. The temples were city landmarks, their festivals were national holidays, and their myths explained everything from lightning to love. You didn't believe in gods out of faith. You believed out of survival instinct. So, after everything, the sun-baked homes, the barley-bread breakfasts, the sandal-blistered treks, the wars, plagues, gods, and goat-related traumas. Let's ask the question plainly. Did you last a single day in ancient Greece? Honestly? Number you'd fold before lunch. The heat, the diet, the constant threat of war or divine punishment would wipe that Instagrammable toga fantasy right off your face. You're not used to hauling water before breakfast, or squatting over a hole in the ground next to a temple goat. You'd miss your running water, your aspirin, and your right to complain without being exiled by pottery shard. You might love the idea of living among marble statues, brilliant philosophers, and epic poets. But guess what? Those were the 1% of ancient Greece. For everyone else, it was back-breaking labor, limited rights, and frequent funerals. Your democracy? Only if you're a male citizen. Your medicine? Garlic and hope. Your gods? Frequently furious. Your social media? A guy yelling in the agora about justice while waving a fish. And yet, for all of that, the Greeks endured. They built temples that still stand, wrote plays we still perform, debated ideas we still wrestle with, and laid the groundwork for everything from astronomy to ethics. They didn't just survive hardship. They created civilization while sweating through it. You wouldn't last. But they did. Not because life was easy, but because they found ways to make meaning in a world full of chaos. They questioned everything, fought constantly, wrote beautifully, died young, and still somehow shaped the modern world. So no, you probably wouldn't make it past your first sunstroke, goat bite, or unsolicited philosophy lesson in the street. But if you did, if you adapted, endured, and listened closely, you'd find yourself standing among some of the most passionate, resilient, and brilliantly flawed people history has ever known. And they wouldn't judge you for struggling. They just hand you a tunic, point to the amphorae, and say, "Good. Now carry that up a hill." It began with a death and a betrayal. Ositagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what is now eastern England, had played the Roman game well. He had walked a tightrope for years, ruling as a client king under the shadow of Rome. He had wealth, autonomy, and peace, so long as he stayed useful to the empire. But when he died around 60 AD, he left behind a will that was meant to protect his people. He named the Roman emperor as co-heir alongside his 2 young daughters, hoping this gesture of loyalty would secure their safety and sovereignty. He was wrong. Rome did not honor the will. Rome didn't negotiate. Rome took. Without hesitation, the Roman authorities annexed the Iceni kingdom outright. Their soldiers stormed in and claimed everything: lands, livestock, homes, and treasures. But the theft of wealth wasn't the worst offense. It was what they did next that turned a political insult into a personal hell. They flogged the queen, Boudica, in public. Not just to humiliate her, but to send a message: you are nothing. And if that wasn't enough, they violated her daughters in front of her. This wasn't just a crackdown. It was psychological warfare, the kind meant to break a people's spirit. But it didn't break Boudica. It forged her. Rome believed it had crushed a minor tribal woman beneath its boot. What it had done was awaken a lioness, a queen who would take her pain and reshape it into vengeance, a mother whose rage would soon set cities ablaze, a woman who would remind Rome that even empires bleed. Word of the atrocity spread quickly through Britannia. Other tribes listened. They remembered their own humiliations, their own land losses, their own sons killed in Roman campaigns. Rome thought the tribes divided, scattered, but in that moment they had one thing in common: Boudica's fury. What began with Rome violating one queen would soon end with the empire reeling in fear. They had broken a treaty, broken a family, and in doing so, broken the illusion of Roman invincibility in Britannia. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the spark that would ignite one of the most ferocious revolts Rome ever faced. If Rome expected Boudica to fade into silence, they misunderstood everything about her. Boudica wasn't born to obey. She was born for leadership. Roman historians, who seldom praised their foes, spoke of her as towering and fierce, with fiery red hair flowing to her waist and a voice that cut through the noise like the blast of a war horn. She wasn't merely a queen by birth. She was a symbol. And now, she had become a threat. But before she became that, she was something more. A mother, stripped of everything, and with nothing left to lose. The gods were unpredictable, intimately involved, and terrifyingly personal. Still, Greek religion wasn't just fear, it was everywhere. It guided politics, oversaw childbirth, sanctified the Olympics. You feared the gods, yes, but you also relied on them. Temples defined the skyline, festivals ruled the calendar. And myths. Myths were the ancient instruction manual for everything, from thunderstorms to heartbreak. You didn't believe in gods because of faith. You believed in them because not doing so might kill you. So after everything, the sun-baked houses, the barley breakfasts, the goat-plagued commutes, the endless wars and divine tantrums, let's ask the real question. Could you survive a single day in ancient Greece? Let's be honest. Number you'd crumble before noon. The heat would flatten you. The food would confuse you. The gods would probably smite you. You'd miss your plumbing, your painkillers, and the luxury of complaining without being voted off the island via broken pottery. You dream of marble statues and Socratic dialogues. Those were for the elite. For most, it was labor, loss, and limitations. Your democracy, men only. Your medicine, garlic and prayers. Your gods, frequently enraged. Your Twitter, a guy in the marketplace yelling about justice with a fish in one hand. And yet, despite all of it, they endured. They built temples that outlasted empires. They wrote tragedies that still move us. They argued ideas we still can't settle. They invented civilization while sweating through it. You wouldn't last, but they did. Not because life was kind, but because they gave chaos meaning. They challenged, created, suffered, and still shaped the world. No, you wouldn't make it past your first sunstroke, goat attack, or unsolicited street philosophy. But if you did, if you adapted, endured, and really listened, you'd find yourself among one of the fiercest, most resilient, most gloriously flawed groups in history. And they wouldn't mock your struggle. They'd hand you a tunic, gesture to the water jugs, and say, "Good. Now carry that up the hill." In ancient Greece, the experience of life and death was deeply embedded in rituals that reflected the community's beliefs, fears, and reverence for both the divine and the human condition. Funerals and menstruation, though seemingly disparate topics, were both treated with a profound sense of order, meaning, and often restriction, revealing the ways in which the Greeks conceptualized bodily functions and transitions in life. Death, in particular, was not simply the cessation of life, but a complex transition of the psyche, soul, from the world of the living to the underworld. The funerary process was an essential series of rites designed to guide the dead on their journey and protect the living from the potential spiritual contamination of death. The funeral was typically structured in three main stages: the prothesis, the ekphora, and the peridapnon. During the prothesis, the body was washed, anointed, and laid out for mourning, a task performed almost exclusively by women. These women, often relatives of the deceased, would engage in ritual laments, tearing their hair and clothes in visible expressions of grief, while also serving a crucial societal function of demonstrating the family's piety and respect for tradition. The ekphora, or funeral procession, took place in the early hours before dawn and involved the transportation of the deceased to their final resting place, whether by cart or carried on foot. This procession was both solemn and public, asserting the deceased's place within the polis and ensuring that their departure was witnessed. Finally, the peridapnon, or funeral feast, brought together the community in shared remembrance, blending sorrow with the reaffirmation of social ties. Graves and tombs were often adorned with stelae, sculpted grave markers that depicted scenes of domestic life, reflecting the virtues of the deceased and reinforcing societal ideals. These monuments were not only tributes, but also signifiers of status and identity. The Greeks believed that proper burial was essential for the soul to rest peacefully. An unburied body risked wandering eternally, denied entrance to the underworld. This belief was so powerful that even enemies might be granted burial rights to prevent such a fate. In parallel, laws were established, most famously by the Athenian lawgiver Solon, to regulate funerary displays, limiting excessive mourning and the size of monuments to maintain civic order and discourage elitism. The treatment of the dead thus served both religious and political ends, balancing private grief with public decorum. Cremation and inhumation practices varied across time and region, with cremation favoured in certain periods, particularly among the elite, and inhumation more common in others. These practices were influenced not only by religious beliefs, but also by evolving social and political conditions. Hero cults developed from these funerary customs, wherein certain deceased individuals were venerated with ongoing rituals, believed to wield power from beyond the grave and offer protection or favor to the living. These cults further blurred the line between the mortal and the divine, incorporating the memory of the dead into the spiritual fabric of the community. Just as death was marked by ritual and taboo, so too was menstruation, a recurring bodily experience that carried both practical and symbolic weight. Ancient Greek medicine, especially as represented in the Hippocratic corpus, viewed the female body as inherently different from the male, primarily defined by its capacity to bleed, bear children, and nurture. The humoral theory posited that women's bodies were wetter and colder, and menstruation was seen as a necessary purging of excess humors. A woman who did not menstruate was often considered ill or unbalanced, while irregular menstruation was thought to cause hysteria or other disorders. Yet, menstruation also rendered women temporarily impure in many religious and social contexts. Miasma, or ritual pollution, was associated with both death and menstruation, and thus menstruating women were often restricted from participating in certain rites, approaching altars, or handling sacred objects. This exclusion was not necessarily punitive, but stemmed from a belief in spiritual contagion, a desire to protect the sanctity of religious spaces. Despite these restrictions, menstruation marked an important stage in a young girl's life. The onset of menarche was a signal of readiness for marriage and motherhood, and Greek society placed considerable emphasis on fertility as a woman's primary contribution to the oikos, household, and the polis. Coming-of-age rituals, such as those dedicated to Artemis, allowed girls to symbolically transition from childhood to womanhood. The Arctea, for instance, involved young girls playing the bear in ritual dances, symbolizing wildness tamed by civilization, a metaphor for puberty and the containment of female sexuality. These rites served both a spiritual and social function, preparing girls for their roles as wives and mothers, while also aligning them with divine protection. Menstrual hygiene in ancient Greece was rudimentary by modern standards. Women likely used folded cloths or pads made from wool or linen, though concrete evidence is scarce. Menstrual blood itself was regarded with ambivalence, feared for its perceived power and impurity, but also acknowledged as a sign of fertility and life-bearing potential. In some myths and literary sources, menstrual blood carried magical or symbolic significance, further underlining its complex status in the Greek imagination. Literature and mythology often reflected cultural attitudes toward menstruation, framing it within broader themes of control, purity, and the feminine. The stories of goddesses and mortal women alike often revolved around their bodies and their roles as mothers, virgins, or temptresses. These narratives reinforced the societal expectations placed on real women, who navigated a world structured by both biological realities and symbolic interpretations. Comparisons with neighboring cultures, such as Rome and Egypt, highlight both shared and unique aspects of Greek beliefs. While all ancient Mediterranean societies acknowledged menstruation as a significant aspect of female life, the Greek emphasis on miasma and ritual purity created a distinctive framework for understanding and managing it. Similarly, the Greek approach to funerals, with its blend of public ritual and private emotion, offers insights into how the society negotiated the universal experiences of birth, death, and reproduction. Ultimately, funerals and menstruation in ancient Greece were not just biological or procedural phenomena. They were cultural scripts that revealed the values, fears, and aspirations of a civilization. They structured the way individuals moved through the stages of life and how communities maintained cohesion in the face of change. By examining these rituals, we gain a deeper understanding of ancient Greek society, not only in its philosophical and artistic achievements, but in its most intimate human experiences. These rituals reinforced gender roles, regulated civic life, and mediated the relationship between humans and the divine. In their practices around both death and menstruation, the ancient Greeks articulated a vision of life that was at once orderly and mysterious, grounded in tradition, yet responsive to the ever-changing rhythms of the body and the cosmos. In addition to the rituals surrounding death and menstruation, the institution of prostitution held a significant place within ancient Greek society, particularly in urban centers such as Athens and Corinth. Prostitution, while morally complex and often stigmatized, was also normalized in many ways and even legally recognized. The Greeks divided prostitutes into distinct categories based on their social status, clientele, and functions. The most visible and celebrated class were the hetairae, courtesans who were often highly educated, articulate, and capable of participating in philosophical discourse and symposia, unlike the common pornae, who worked in brothels or on the streets. Hetairae could attain considerable influence and wealth. They were often companions to elite men, forming relationships that combined sexual, intellectual, and sometimes emotional intimacy. Hetairae, such as Aspasia, who was closely associated with Pericles, were admired and even feared for their wit and influence, though never fully integrated into respectable female society. Conversely, pornae were more numerous and less esteemed, working in state-sanctioned brothels or offering their services independently. These women were often slaves or metics, resident foreigners, with limited autonomy over their own lives. Despite their marginal status, they fulfilled a social function, serving the sexual needs of men and thereby protecting citizen women, whose chastity and modesty were idealized and closely guarded. This gendered dichotomy allowed Athenian men to separate the roles of sexual satisfaction and familial duty, preserving the sanctity of the oikos while indulging desires in spaces sanctioned for such behavior. The economic aspect of prostitution was also significant. Some brothels were operated by pimps or madams who profited off the labor of the women, and the state levied taxes on prostitution, recognizing it as a source of public revenue. In some cases, state officials even regulated the operation of brothels, ensuring a level of oversight and organization. However, the consequences of prostitution extended beyond the economic or sexual. Prostitution reinforced the subordination of women by reducing many to commodities, valued for their physicality rather than personhood. While some hetairae could exercise a degree of agency, the vast majority of prostitutes had little control over their circumstances. Many were subject to abuse, both physical and emotional, and their precarious status left them vulnerable to exploitation. Furthermore, while male clients faced little to no social repercussion for their involvement, women associated with sex work, regardless of context or consent, were often permanently marked by stigma. This asymmetry perpetuated a broader social structure in which women's sexuality was tightly controlled and frequently commodified. Prostitution also intersected with religious and cultural spaces. In certain cults, such as those dedicated to Aphrodite, sacred prostitution was reputed to have taken place, especially in locations like Corinth. While the historical accuracy of temple prostitution is debated among scholars, the association of sexuality with divine power underscores the complexity of Greek attitudes towards sex. On one hand, it could be sacred and life-giving. On the other, it could be corrupting and polluting. Greek drama and literature often explored these themes, using prostitutes as stock characters to highlight moral dilemmas or satirize social hypocrisy. The tension between admiration and condemnation was ever present, mirroring the conflicted place of prostitution in public consciousness. The consequences of prostitution in ancient Greece were thus manifold. On an individual level, it shaped the lives of countless women, some who found relative empowerment, others who endured suffering and marginalization. On a societal level, it reflected and reinforced broader structures of gender, class, and power. The practice was embedded in the very fabric of Greek life, affecting laws, economy, religion, and the arts. By examining prostitution in ancient Greece, one confronts the contradictions of a culture that could simultaneously celebrate eroticism and demand female chastity, that could revere certain women for their minds, while degrading others for their bodies. In these contradictions lie deeper truths about ancient Greek society, its values, its inequalities, and its enduring influence on Western thought. As with funerals and menstruation, the institution of prostitution reveals the ways in which the Greeks negotiated the complexities of the human condition, crafting elaborate social codes to manage the messiness of desire, power, and identity.